Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of Parsing the Truth, one bite at a time. This episode is a little different. We recorded this live at the Oxygen Forensics Conference. So you will find in parts, there is no video for a couple minutes, and the sound might get a little muffled. We apologize for that. But we still think you're going to think it's a great episode. And finally, we have to thank Briggs for recording this for us and giving us our own personal laugh track. Thanks, everybody, and please enjoy.
Join former FBI senior forensic examiners Becky Passmore and Stacy Eldridge as they dig into the world of digital forensics, one bite at a time. Now leading their own consulting firms and educating the next generation of cyber sleuths. These badass babes of digital forensics bring sharp insight, real-world case experience, and a dose of humor to the bits and bytes that build today's investigations. From deep dives into business email compromise and ransomware attacks, Becky's specialty, to cracking the complexities of iPhone forensics, Stacy's obsession. This podcast delivers insider knowledge for professionals, students, and true crime techies alike. If you've ever wondered what really happens when the digital trail is all that's left, tune in and start parsing the truth.
Welcome to Parsing the Truth, 1 terabyte at a time. I am Stacy Eldridge, and as always, I have my co-host Becky Passmore with me for this live podcast at the Oxygen Forensics Conference, Legacy and Logic. Today, you're going to be looking back at 25 years of digital forensics, a journey from the days of floppy disks and flip phones to the era where a single device can hold terabytes of secrets. Digital forensics has transformed how we uncover the truth. And today, we celebrate the evolution, the innovation, and the cases that changed everything.
Thanks, Stacy. Today, we're exploring the evolution of digital forensics, the devices that defined an era, the artifacts that told the stories, and the complexity that continues to challenge us all. When we talk about the complexity explosion, we're going all the way back to the 1990s, the point where digital forensics truly began to accelerate into the massive data-driven world we know today.
The complexity explosion in digital forensics is a journey that some of us have experienced firsthand, one where our world of evidence has grown not just in size, but in diversity, depth, and difficulty. So let's take a look back at the different digital evidence eras.
It began in the 1990s when our big cases revolved around 1.44 megabytes of floppy disk, which were considered cutting edge. Sir Mix-a-Lot had Baby Got Back, and digital forensics folks had Baby Got Bytes. Let's be honest, we like big data and we cannot lie. Evidence recovery meant repairing physical damage and navigating simple fat file systems. Forensic examiners were pioneers in interpreting bits, bytes, and strings of ones and zeros to tell a story that no one else could see.
Forensic examiners were pioneers in interpreting bits, bytes, strings, ones, zeros, all to tell a story that no one else could see. We didn't have advanced tools or automated parsing. We had to build the methods, understand the hex, and prove the digital traces mattered. It was never about managing millions of files. It was about finding that one deleted file that could change the direction of the case. It was about understanding how the metadata hidden within a document could lead to finding a killer. These were the moments in digital forensics that proved its worth in the pursuit of justice. Becky, the 2000s are rolling in, the data is getting bigger, the drives are heating up, and let's be honest, things are getting hot in here. We changed when we started dealing with 40 gigabyte hard drives and a whole new kind of forensic pressure. Yep, that's the early 2000s. Again, some of you weren't even born during this. The era of the hard drive. Suddenly, digital evidence wasn't just a few files on a floppy disk. It was entire systems, overflowing inboxes, and the first wave of the mobile device data. We pulled plugs on scene and then imaged every bit of the hard drive because that was best practice. What used to take an hour now took a whole day and sometimes even longer. Imaging became a waiting game, and patience was a new forensic skill. We were transitioning from carving deleted files to reconstructing digital lives. The data told us who, what, when, and how long. Timestamps, logins, browser history all began painting a clearer picture of human behavior behind a keyboard. But this era was also brought with new obstacles, earlier forms of encryption, password-protected files, and rapidly evolving email platforms. Forensic tools were essential, but they were still young. Every update felt like a leap forward. The hard drive era tested our endurance and our skill. It was no longer about if the evidence was there. It was how fast we could find it and if we could break through the barriers to reach it. Becky, what era did you begin in? Are you talking about our eras tour in digital forensics? I started in 2004 from floppy disk to forensic framework. I've been shaking it off ever since. Stacy, which era did you begin?
Well, I started back in 2004 and was certified by the end of 2005 in the FBI. And right when Justin Timberlake was bringing sexy back, I was bringing files back.
Bam.
And that is how we met. Yep. Through the training at the FBI. By 2010s, digital forensics had stepped into an entirely new frontier, the era of social media, smartphones, and the cloud. Storage capacity surged from a few gigabytes to terabytes, significantly increasing the complexity of our cases. Evidence now lived everywhere. It hid in Facebook messages, Gmail threads, synced invisibly through the iCloud, fingered in apps, app data that users never knew existed. For the first time, the digital world was bigger than the physical one, and to learn how to investigate, and we had to learn how to investigate both. The challenge shifted from finding data to deciding where to start. Investigators now needed to navigate a growing network of platforms, accounts, and cloud providers, all protected by privacy laws, encryption, and ever-changing access procedures. Search warrants expanded their scope from individual devices to encompass an entire digital ecosystem. Writing warrants were challenging. Where did that data live physically? Did the warrant cover the location of the evidence, the house, the vehicle, the shed, the office, the cloud, the server? But with that came complexity. Every case meant thousands of files, dozens of devices, and countless log entries. The 2010s taught us that digital forensics wasn't about data. It was about meaning, about connecting fragments to form truth in a connected world.
By the time we hit the late 2010s, digital evidence was everywhere. Cloud data, social media, mobile apps, it was coming at us faster than ever before. Honestly, Becky, I think by the end of the week, most of us said, I can't feel my face, and I just want to move into the weekend.
And here we are today, the 2020s, what we call the age of data overload. We've entered the terabyte era, where a single smartphone can hold more information than an entire evidence lab once did. Our digital evidence lives everywhere now. In the cloud, across Internet of Things, inside vehicles, smartwatches, doorbell cameras, and encrypted apps. And let's not forget our refrigerators. It's everywhere. Where encryption isn't an option anymore, it's the default. Every investigation is enormously complex. Massive data volumes, privacy hurdles, cross-jurisdictional warrants, even AI-generated content blurring the line between fact and fiction. This is where forensic skill meets innovation. Forensics is no longer about imaging a hard drive and waiting for results. It's about making real-time decisions in the middle of an active investigation. Today, digital forensics has shifted from recovering what was once lost to understanding what's happening right now. But here's the real shift. Instead of trying to know everything about everything, we've learned to go deeper. We focus on understanding the artifacts more, mastering the tools better, and delivering the results faster. Our goal isn't just to process data, it's to interpret it with purpose. We focus on outcomes, on expectations, on clarity, not just the totality of the data. We've also recognized that no one can do this alone. The best examiners aren't isolated, they're connected. We collaborate, build networks of experts, share strategies that bridge that gap between technical findings and legal storytelling. We've learned to communicate better with attorneys to help them articulate what the data really means in court, turning technical complexity into compelling truth. The 2020s have redefined our profession. We're no longer just examiners. We're the techiest of the scientists. We're analysts. We're report writers, educators, and truth finders operating in a world that never stops creating data. So as the data have evolved, so have we. From floppy disks to terabytes in the cloud, every leap in technology reshaped how we investigate, analyze, and uncover the truth. But behind that evolution are the stories, the cases that tested us, changed us, and proved just how powerful digital evidence can be. Stacy, some of these cases didn't just make headlines. They had us dancing the night away in the lab, chasing evidence through drives, phones, and logs until the truth came out. Let's talk about a few of those cases that truly changed the game.
Absolutely. So in my opinion, one of the first big cases that helped us prove the power of digital forensics and how facts discovered by forensic examiners could be used to help solve major crimes was the case of the BTK killer. The BTK killer had murdered people across Kansas for 17 years, and then nothing. He reemerged 14 years later, taunting police. And during those exchanges, he posed a question. Can I send you a floppy disk? Can you track it? Be honest. So the detectives asked their forensic examiner, Randy Stone. Randy said there could be data on there that might use to track him. So the detectives told BT Killer, no, go ahead and send us that floppy disk. Randy prepped for the floppy by conducting tests to ensure that X-raying it wouldn't damage anything on it. They were fearful that explosives might be contained in it based on some of the things the BTK killer was saying. And X-raying it would prove no problem, wouldn't alter it in any way. And finally, that purple floppy disk arrived. They rushed to the lab. The metadata of the RTF files present on that purple floppy disk contained clues, and those clues would eventually lead to the killer. The metadata contained clues such as the name of a church, Christ Lutheran, the name of a town, Park City, a name in the last edited by field, Dennis Rader. It wasn't a confession. Dear police, I started killing people in 1974, and here are all my victims. Love, Dennis Rader. No, nothing like that. It wasn't so obvious. It was the recovery of the metadata that would provide leads that could be investigated and put together to discover who done it. And this metadata, coupled with solid investigation work, finally led to a suspect confessing 34 years after the first murder. Dennis Rader finally admitted he was a BTK killer.
How about the first infamous case involving digital forensics that went to trial?
Let's talk about the Casey Anthony trial. This is one of the first trials that really exploded with social media, 24/7 news cycles, and it was hot across the globe. And there was certainly lots of digital evidence in this case. 3 different digital forensic examiners testified multiple times, and there was even a defense expert who stayed behind the scenes, never entering the courtroom. But instead, from the safe house in Orlando, Larry Daniel helped the defense call into question the chloroform searches presented by the state. Now, for years, fingers have been pointing and saying they simply should have validated their results. And this case was used to teach people the consequences of not validating the results with 2 different tools. But what happens when 2 different tools don't agree? What happens when 4 different tools don't agree, such as what happened in this very case, where net analysis, EnCase, CacheFact, and FTK all produced different results on that MORC database. They were all different. What did? So the strategy can be to try not to introduce those results into court because you couldn't validate them. But what happens if they do get introduced? Remember, we're there to answer the questions, not ask them. The prosecution wasn't supposed to ask John Bradley about the 84 times that chloroform site was visited, but they did. Now, this opened up an entirely new line of questioning in the courtroom. And after thoroughly reviewing this case, Becky and I believe that the attorney's strategy, especially surrounding the chloroform site visit counts, did a disservice to John Bradley. This was further compounded by the fact that the Orange County Sheriff Office explicitly advised the attorneys to avoid that specific line of questioning. And in this completely unusual case, where lots of unusual things happen constantly, they had John Bradley read in data from a report that he didn't generate while he was on the stand. Now, the Orange County Sheriff's Office did state, we're not going to use this data. We don't want to use this data, but that doesn't mean you're off the hook. The defense gets what you generated as a digital forensic examiner along with your reports. So they know what you know. So you better be prepared to answer those questions.
So after all the time we spent on the Casey Anthony case, do you think there are new lessons learned for examiners?
Yeah, I think we can find 2 new lessons learned out of this case. So from the Casey Anthony trial, we can learn first that lawyers are responsible for asking the questions and getting the evidence in. I think it's super easy to forget their role in all of this because we can prep with them and have discussions with them about everything we think about the digital evidence and what we think is important and what we want to say when we're on the stand. But ultimately, the attorneys are there to present evidence and arguments to support their client's position. Secondly, avoiding unreliable data simply isn't the answer. You should be prepared to answer questions about it, because even if your lawyer isn't going to ask you questions about it, the other side just might.
That's right. But what about a case that isn't so old? You know, BTK Taylor, way back then.
Yeah.
Casey Anthony, way back then.
They're a little old.
Are cases involving digital forensics still making the news today?
Anybody heard of a little trial involving Karen Reed?
The first trial or the second trial?
Oh, I mean both. Both of these trials were spicy because the defense and the prosecution, their digital forensic experts had completely differing opinions about a little artifact from the browser state DB. And also what a little red X means. These opinions were so different that one expert's conclusion enabled the defense to not only say Karen Reed did not do it, it enabled them to use this artifact to imply that others were responsible for the death of John O'Keefe during the first trial. And throughout the trial, lots of digital evidence centering around the iPhone. But of course, we had vehicle forensics, there was video footage, and even timestamps all being called into question. But who knew a little red X in a tool could lead to such differing opinions? So what's the difference between a record being marked as recovered versus a record being marked as deleted in your tool? Do you know? Second, how do you validate if someone is deleting that record on purpose, or if instead this is simply how the iOS and the database are interacting together? Let's jump into some lessons learned now. First, I think the first lesson learned from Karen Reed's trial is let us think how a little red X should remind us the importance of knowing how your tools work. So not only does this show the pitfalls of over-reliance on automated tools, perhaps it demonstrates the importance of attending vendor training so you know how your tools actually work. Now we can jump into how long to die in the cold. It was a Google search found on Jennifer McCabe's phone. This Google search for how long to die in the cold is what turned the Karen Reed case into a true crime phenomenon. The defense claimed that this claim was made hours before John O'Keefe was found dying in the snow, and this suggested that someone knew he was there and didn't save him. Now, it was Richard Green's affidavit, the defense expert, who said that this search occurred at 2:27 a.m. And this kicked off a whole chain of events where it resulted in additional forensic examiners being called in, calls to celebrate, hours and hours of additional testing and validation, and even Jennifer McCabe being harassed for months and months by the public. This search for how long to die in the cold was found in the browser state DB. It was not found in the history DB. These are 2 different databases that serve 2 different purposes. The browser state DB, to oversimplify it, is basically tracking your tabs and their status. It is not tracking all of your browser history. However, the history DB tracks your internet browsing in Safari on your iPhone. This brings us to the second lesson learned. That browser state DB artifact for the search for how long to die in the cold demonstrates that no artifact lives in isolation. You need to validate your conclusion by looking at related artifacts. And in this case, it was important to take a look at that internet history as well. In addition to doing that, I think it would have been crucial to review the events that were occurring immediately before and after that search allegedly took place at 2:27 a.m. You have to build the whole picture.
So since there was so much disagreement over that house long to die in the cold artifact, was it included in the second trial?
It is worth noting that that digital forensic examiner for the defense that was used in the first trial did not come back to the second trial, nor did they use that house long to die in the cold defense strategy.
So any more lessons learned in the Karen Reed trial?
You bet there are. Let's pick up with the third lesson. The Karen Reed trial shows us just how complex iPhone exams are and the importance of testing and validating what you're seeing when you're stating that something happened. The two witnesses for the state, Jessica Hyde and Ian Whiffen, both conducted tests on iPhones to be able to confirm the significance and the meaning of the data that they were talking about. During the first trial in the courtroom, they spent time discussing what their testing was, what they did, and what it meant in terms for that house long to die in the cold search, and what it meant for the browser state DB versus the history DB. Now, during the second trial, Ian Whiffen went on to spend more time talking about additional testing he had conducted, and that was related to the Apple Health data. But I'm going to come back to Apple Health data in a minute. Let's focus on why we should test and validate. Remember, the tools are just that, tools. They help us get the job done. It's our responsibility to check that they are interpreting the data correctly. I also find it so odd that in an industry full of people who are typically so suspicious of everyone and everything, but when it comes to our vendor tools, we tend to put a lot of blind trust in them. I'm not saying the tools are garbage. Absolutely not. We have to use them to get through the mass amounts of data we're facing today. We're no longer examining every bit on every device that we get. But when it comes to altering someone's life forever and the ripples that come with it, we have to take a moment and test and validate the assertions that we are making. And there's so much data on the iPhones. And when you're relying on that data that goes beyond simple artifacts such as pictures and text, and you're starting to dig deep into the databases, and now we're even starting to get into the unified logs, all of that data and the new information they can provide, we can't blindly rely on the column names to accurately document the data contained within them for their meaning. If you've ever looked at column name in a database, in an Apple database, you will see that the names are just crazy. Why do so many of them start with ZZZZZ? I have no idea, and it makes no sense. But one of the things that shockingly happens with Apple is they release new iOS versions all the time. And those new versions can bring changes. And sometimes those Apple engineers just shove the new data into old columns. Now, testing is going to bring truth to the many assumptions we've held for years. So now I want to loop back to that Apple Health data. Have you ever heard people saying for years that when it comes to Apple Health floors, they can be either up or down? Well, they can't. They're just up. Now, we have to remember that this data is related to health tracking. Health apps and fitness apps and trackers, they don't care that you're going downstairs. They care that you're going upstairs for health purposes. That's what you're going to track. And I'm not stating that it's up because this is based on my assumption that they care about up for exercise and fitness. I'm basing this on the fact that there is actually an additional database related to Apple Health data, and it's seldom talked about. But this database shows descent. So please stop saying that the floor's climb can be either up or down. It's simply up. And I'm going to talk about some of these databases, and the names may slightly vary depending on your iOS. I'm talking about a case I work. So if you would look at the cache encrypted c.db, you will see floors ascended and descended. But then if you go back to the healthdb.sqlite, you'll notice that it's not like doing math with it. It's not adding the floors up and then subtracting the floors down and then giving you a sum total. It's not doing that. All it's doing is reporting all of the floors ascended together. So it's just up. Now, how did I know? Because I tested it and I asked other examiners what they saw. Now, why did I test it? Because in a case I had, it made a huge difference if the floors were going up or down. But testing and validating can be really tricky, especially when you're giving an old case. Getting back to the right iOS, and on the right phone can be downright impossible. And getting the right devices can also be expensive, and it can be time consuming. And therefore, it can be expensive for your client to pay for as well. Now let's move on to a fourth lesson. During the trial, we also got to watch an expert get raked over the coals for listing a degree they hadn't earned yet on their CV. And I think this is a subtle reminder. Lawyers will attach you with whatever they can, whenever they can, to make you look bad on the stand. Now, finally, it's really easy for us to sit up here and tell you what we think after we've had the ability to go back and watch both of the Karen Reed trials twice and then replay certain parts of it over and over again, and then having the luxury of conferring with our notes. But how would have this all gone down if you or I had been on the stand, if we had been the expert? And what questions would the lawyers have asked us when we were in the hot seat? Who knows? But we have the ability to go back and watch these trials, any of these trials, and this is a huge learning experience for all of us, and it's free. Becky, let's crank up the nostalgia. Back when Nirvana ruled the airwaves and the forensics smelled less like Teen Spirit and more like First Circuits, let's walk through some of the devices that started it all.
Yeah, let's do that. Floppy disk. Yep. So, anyway, I was seeing a few of these. We have a few floppy disks here. So with the 8-inch, the 5.25 inch, the 3.5 inch, the floppy disk family marked the beginning of portable data storage. The 8-inch was introduced in 1971. Yeah, held a mere 80 kilobytes of data, mostly used by maintenance. The smallest 5.25-inch version was 1976 to the 1990s. That increased the capacity to a whole 1.2 megabytes.
I kind of use this for playing organ shell.
Side of the century.
Becoming the standard for early PCs. By the mid-1980s, the 3.5-inch floppy arrived, sturdier, protected by a hard plastic shell, and capable of storing up to 1.44 megabytes.
But which one is the real floppy disk here? Which one? Which one? Red or yellow? Which one's real?
Red. Depends how you define floppy.
The red one is an actual floppy disk. This one's just supposed to. So the 3.5 is no longer floppy.
Drip disk, software installation, document transfers, or what we call Ethernet, and saving critical system data long before flash drives or the cloud even existed. The floppy disk still lives on your computers today as the save icon, a digital fossil from computing's early days.
Now, hard drives were certainly around way back when, but they were small. They weren't small in size in terms of this one, but they were small in size of data, around 80 megabytes. Yes, megabytes. Now, in the 90s, Windows 95 had users demanding more storage. And then so we had 1 and 2 gigabyte hard drives that were becoming more commonplace. And by the end of the 90s, 10 gigabytes was pretty standard. But then in the 2000s, we were there for the 40 gigabyte hard drive. And I remember in the lab constantly imaging 40 gigabyte hard drive after 40 gigabyte hard drive. And then came the bigger ones. We were starting to get the 80 gigabytes, and then we jumped to 120, and then we jumped to 250, and then 500 gigabytes was pretty standard for quite a while. But today, it's pretty common to see 1 terabyte solid state drive, and even the cheapest of laptops. And external hard drives at anybody's house could average 10 terabytes. But did you know that Toshiba plans to release a 40 terabyte hard drive in 2027? Bigger data is coming. And over time, I mean, this hard drive I think was 40 gigabytes. And the laptop, it had all the pins for the IDE drives as well. But this one, and this was, I think I got this one in 2006. This little thumb drive was 4 gigabytes. And we were like, that's amazing. It's 4 gigabytes and it's so small. And this thumb drive I have here now is 120 gigabytes on this little one. And I think this teeny tiny one here is also 120 gigabytes. So we've really compacted down on how much data we can fit on something so small. And then as sizes increase, but the devices decrease, sometimes it became harder to find some of these things when we were going out on our search warrants to find stuff. But let's jump back into the history of the hard drives and solid state drives themselves. I think it's interesting to go through some of the physical connections as they've evolved over time. They actually first started out with SCSI interfaces. I wasn't dealing with a lot of SCSI in the FBI in terms of hard drives, but I was using SCSI to send all of my images to tape. And we had, as we mentioned, the IDE drives. And we had to struggle with making sure that the jumper cap was on the correct pin. And we had to make sure we had the right configuration where we're putting it into master or slave or table select. And we had to make sure we got it right before we did our imaging. Let me tell you, don't even ask ChatGPT to like diagram out something like this for you, especially on the bigger hard drives, and label what was what, because it simply couldn't do it, even after being given the picture of what it should look like. So now the SATA drives came along in the 2000s and they gave us a lot more speed. So we're excited about that. But of course, we can't forget about the solid state drives that came around in 2010. And we were spending a pretty penny so we could get a 64 gig solid state drive into our exam machine so it could be the temp drive. Now, Becky, what about some other drives that weren't computers but still had digital evidence on them?
Well, we have the iPod first generation, released in October 2001, and it redefined that portable music with its promise of 1,000 songs in your pocket. It transformed the way people interacted with music, sleek, simple, and shockingly powerful at its time. There was 5 gigs of the hard drive that could store 1,000 songs. It had 10 hours of playback, and the original iPod sparked a cultural shift because music became personal, portable, and perfectly organized. It paved the way for that iTunes store and eventually the iPhone. The very first iPod could only be used on Macs.
But Microsoft, as always, comes out a few years later with a competitor. So here we have the Microsoft Zune introduced in 2006. My Zune still works, still has my music on it. I will say I liked it better than the iPod. Why? Because my headset port was in the top and not in the bottom. So I could like set it down while I was exercising and stuff like that. But anyway, so the Zune, Microsoft's answer to the iPod. It offered wireless sharing. Before AirDrop existed, you had customizable backgrounds and you could have a Zoom pass that would give you unlimited music. But despite the innovative ideas, it never gained traction because 5 years later, Apple already had mass dominance with the iPod. Now, it did have some social sharing where you could do wireless song swaps, and then you could share a song with your friend, and then they could play it 3 times in 3 days.
Then you had the original iPad. 2010. Apple's first iPad introduced the post-PC era. It was sleek, touch-driven, and blurred the lines between a laptop and phone. Steve Jobs introduced it from couch, saying it was better than a laptop, better than a smartphone. We also have the iPad 2 that was noticeably thinner, offering better performance and usability.
Next up came the iPod mini. So it was still just black and white, but it was much smaller. It was tiny and cool, and it finally made digital music feel personal. And its new click wheel became iconic. Now, this was discontinued after just 18 months. It was replaced by the iPod Nano, and that is the beginning of fashion meets tech.
So the iPod Nano, 2005 to 2017. Nano evolved across 7 generations from candy bar design to touch screen, music companion. It symbolized portability and personalization. And a little known fact about this is the 6th generation of the Nano was so small, people wore it as a watch with third-party wrist straps. So I wonder if that's how they came up with this iWatch.
Next up, we have the Nokia phone, early 2000s. This is a classic. Nokia dominated the pre-smartphone era with models like the 3310. It was known for its indestructibility, long battery life, and snake. Now, it did work on the 2G GSM network. It had a monochrome display, so that means, monochrome, either black and white or black and green, depending on your version. But anyway, battery on this thing could last for 10 days. Could you imagine not having to charge your phone every single night? And it also had physical buttons, and you could just touch these buttons. But if you wanted to text, you had to go through the numbers. So if you wanted to see, you had to hit 1 3 times. But some people could text like monsters on this. They were machines. It was amazing. Also, the Nokia 3310 could survive drops and possibly a mild apocalypse. Then you get this Motorola Razr, which was launched in 2004. It wasn't just a phone, it was a status symbol.
Yep.
The Razr brought style to the mobile world. For the first time, a phone was more about fashion and less about function. But it has a camera. It had 5 megabytes internal. It had Bluetooth, a mini USB, and you could talk on it for 7 hours. And it came in different colors. It was the fashion. Motorola sold over 130 million units, making it the best-selling phones ever. The Razr paved the way for the modern smartphone design, and it showed that people didn't just want technology, they wanted technology to look good. We also have an original iPhone. The first generation was out in 2007. Not too bad. But when Steve Jobs announced the iPhone, he said it's an iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. It's all in one, and he changed tech forever. Early iPhones introduced the multi-touch interface, and it was the beginning of the Apple and the app ecosystem. Fun fact, the original iPhone didn't have copy and paste. It didn't have video recording or picture messaging. So these devices weren't just part of our digital lives. They were the first digital evidence items that taught us how to recover, extract, and preserve data. Each one challenged us to learn new tools, adapt new techniques, and build the foundations of modern digital forensics. So what began as curiosity about how it works became the science of how to find the truth inside the data. These early devices paved the way for today's advanced methods of acquisition, analysis, and preservation, reminding us that every byte has a story and every artifact has a legacy. From floppy disks to forensics in the cloud, our field has transformed from recovering single deleted files to analyzing entire digital ecosystems. Each era has brought new devices, new challenges, and new lessons. But one thing has never changed: our mission to uncover the truth 1 terabyte at a time today, 1 byte at a time when we started. The stories we've shared today remind us that digital forensics isn't just about data. It's about people, decisions, and accountability. Every artifact tells a story, and every examiner has a responsibility to make sure that story is accurate, tested, and validated. We've seen how metadata can catch a killer, how validation can make or break a trial, and how testing reveals the truth behind the tools we trust. The devices have evolved, the data has exploded, and the stakes have never been higher. But through it all, our purpose has remained clear: to interpret the data with integrity, communicate it with clarity, and as always, seek the truth. Because in the end, it's not just about technology, it's about trust. The evidence may live in the digital world, but the impact lives in the real one. And that's why we do what we do. This has been Parsing the Truth, 1 byte at a time. Thanks for joining us live at Oxygen Forensics Conference, where legacy meets logic. The future of digital forensics continues to unfold, and we've survived the first 25 years, and we will survive the next 25 years. Until next time, stay safe, stay sharp, and as always, keep parsing the truth 1 byte at a time.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow us to get notified the next time a new episode drops. If you can do more, head on over to parsingthetruth.com and donate by clicking on the donate button. Parsing the Truth is a nonprofit organization, and we are raising money to send a new digital forensic examiner to IASIS training next year in Orlando. Thanks.